The Rodriguez Ranch sat 15 miles outside Abilene, Texas, on 400 acres of mesquite and prairie grass that had been in the family for 3 generations. It was a working cattle operation, serious, practical, profitable. They bred stock for rodeos, raised commercial beef, and maintained a reputation for quality animals that could be trusted under pressure. But Schumann was different. Schumann was a problem. The bull stood in the isolation pen at the far end of the ranch, a massive Brahman-cross with a gray coat, a prominent hump, and horns that curved forward like weapons. He was 6 years old, weighed 2,200 pounds, and had earned a reputation that made even experienced cowboys nervous. Fernando Rodriguez, the ranch foreman, and a man who'd worked with cattle for 43 years, stood at the pen's rail watching Schumann with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. Fernando was 61, weathered and strong, with hands that could rope a steer in 3 seconds flat. But Schumann? Schumann had thrown Fernando twice in the past year. Not because Fernando was incompetent, because Schumann didn't want to be handled. "He's getting worse," said Regis Santos, the ranch's head wrangler, walking up beside Fernando. Regis was 38, built like a truck, with a thick mustache and shoulders that could carry fence posts all day without complaint. "Yesterday he charged the gate when I brought feed. Didn't even wait to see what I was doing. Just charged." Fernando nodded grimly. "He's done that with Bartolomeu too, and Sebastian. Nobody can get near him without him going into attack mode." Bartolomeu Silva and Sebastian Javier were 2 of the ranch's most experienced hands, men who'd worked with difficult bulls for decades. If they couldn't handle Schumann, that meant the bull had crossed a line from difficult to dangerous. "What's the owner want to do?" Regis asked, though he already knew the answer. "Mateus is coming by Friday to make a decision," Fernando said. Mateus Gonior was the ranch owner, a practical businessman who loved his cattle, but understood the liability of keeping an animal that couldn't be safely handled. "If we can't show improvement by then, Schumann goes to auction, and with his reputation, he'll probably end up at a slaughterhouse." The 2 men stood in silence, watching the bull. Schumann wasn't pacing or displaying obvious aggression. He just stood there, massive and still, watching them back with dark eyes that held intelligence and something else, wariness maybe, or pain. "What happened to him?" Regis asked. "He wasn't like this when he first arrived." Fernando sighed. "He came from the Morrison operation up in Oklahoma. They used him for bucking stock at small rodeos. According to the paperwork, he was handled rough. Electric prods, tight pens, aggressive training. By the time we bought him 2 years ago, the damage was done. He'd learned that humans meant pain, so he protected himself the only way he knew how." "Can't blame him for that," Regis muttered. "No," Fernando agreed. "But we can't keep him either. Not if he's a danger to the crew." What neither man mentioned was the incident 3 weeks ago that had sealed Schumann's fate. Oliver Ruiz, a young hand who'd been working at the ranch for 6 months, had entered Schumann's pen to repair a broken water line. Schumann had charged without warning, catching Oliver by surprise. Oliver had escaped by diving through the fence rails, but he'd dislocated his shoulder in the process. He'd quit the next day, saying he wasn't getting paid enough to risk his life. "He's smart," Fernando said quietly. "That's the problem. He's not just reacting on instinct. He's calculating. He waits for the right moment. He plans his attacks. That makes him more dangerous than a bull that just charges blindly." From the main house, about 200 yards away, they could hear the sound of a screen door slamming and a child's laughter. Fernando turned to see his granddaughter, Sofia, running across the yard with her arms spread like airplane wings. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark curly hair and a smile that could light up the darkest days. Sofia had been living with Fernando and his wife for the past 8 months, ever since her mother, Fernando's daughter Isabella, had died in a car accident. The grief had been devastating for everyone, but especially for Sofia, who'd gone from a bright, talkative child to a quiet, withdrawn shadow of herself. Lately, though, she'd been showing interest in the ranch again. She'd started asking to help with the horses, wanting to learn to ride, watching the cowboys work with a curiosity that reminded Fernando painfully of Isabella at that age. "Keep Sofia away from this pen," Fernando told Regis firmly. "I don't want her anywhere near Schumann, understand? Of course, Regis said. But you know she's been watching him. Fernando's jaw tightened. What do you mean? Last week, I saw her standing by this fence, just watching. She wasn't trying to get close or anything, just standing there staring at him. Regis paused. And the weird thing? Schumann was watching her back. Not aggressive, not defensive, just watching. Like he was curious about her. Fernando felt a cold knot form in his stomach. I'll talk to her. Make sure she understands this bull is off limits. But even as he said it, he turned to look at Schumann again. The bull was still standing motionless, but his head had turned slightly toward the house, toward the sound of Sofia's laughter. His ears were forward, not flattened back in aggression, but forward in attention. That's strange, Regis muttered, seeing the same thing. Fernando had worked with cattle his entire life. He knew their body language, their moods, their patterns, and what he was seeing now didn't match Schumann's usual aggressive posture. The bull looked interested, not threatening, just aware. Friday, Fernando said, more to himself than to Regis. We've got until Friday to figure something out. As the two men walked back toward the barn, Schumann remained at the fence, his dark eyes still turned toward the distant sound of a child's laughter. Deep in his massive chest, something shifted, something that had been locked away under layers of fear and defensive violence for 2 years. Something that recognized innocence when it heard it. Something that remembered, perhaps, what it felt like to be gentle. But Fernando didn't know that yet. None of them did. They only knew that Schumann was dangerous, that he couldn't be handled, and that his time at the Rodriguez ranch was running out. What they didn't know was that in 3 days, a 7-year-old girl with curly hair and a broken heart would do something impossible. And in doing it, she would change not just Schumann's fate, but the hearts of every tough, weathered cowboy who witnessed it. Sofia Rodriguez had been watching Schumann for 3 weeks, though she'd never told her grandfather. She knew she wasn't supposed to go near the isolation pen. She'd heard the warnings, heard the men talking about how dangerous the bull was, heard the story about Oliver Ruiz and the dislocated shoulder. But she couldn't help herself. Something about Schumann called to her. Every afternoon, when Fernando thought she was playing in the yard or helping her grandmother in the house, Sofia would slip away to the old oak tree that stood 40 feet from Schumann's pen. She'd sit in the shade, her back against the trunk, and watch the massive gray bull. At first, she'd been scared. He was so big. His horns looked sharp. His body radiated power in a way that made her feel very small. But she kept coming back, drawn by something she couldn't explain to anyone, not even herself. Schumann noticed her the second day. She'd seen his head turn, his ears swivel forward, his dark eyes lock onto her small figure under the tree. For a long moment, they'd just looked at each other. Sofia had held her breath, waiting for him to charge or bellow or do something aggressive like the men said he always did. But he hadn't. He just watched her. Curious. Still. After that, watching Schumann became Sofia's secret ritual. She'd sit under the oak tree, sometimes for an hour, and the bull would position himself at the fence closest to her. He never came all the way to the rails. He maintained distance, as if he understood boundaries, but he'd stand there, watching her with those intelligent dark eyes. Sofia started talking to him, quietly, so no one would hear. She told him about her mother, about how much she missed her, about the nightmares that made her wake up crying. She told him about feeling angry and sad and confused all at the same time. She told him things she couldn't tell her grandparents because she didn't want to make them cry more than they already did. And Schumann listened. His ears would track her voice. His head would tilt slightly. He never interrupted with aggressive movements or threatening postures. He just stood there, massive and patient, like he understood that she needed someone to hear her. "They say you're mean," Sofia told him one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say you hurt people and that you're too dangerous to keep. But I don't think you're mean. I think you're sad. Like me." Schumann made a low sound in his chest, not quite a bellow, more like a rumble. Sofia took it as agreement. "My mom died," she continued, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Car accident. I wasn't with her. I was at school. And now she's gone forever. And I didn't get to say goodbye. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Everyone keeps telling me it's going to be okay, but it's not okay. It's never going to be okay. The bull took a step closer to the fence. Just one step. His head lowered slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. Sofia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I think you understand. I think something bad happened to you too. That's why you're angry at everyone, because being angry is easier than being sad. She didn't know how right she was. Schumann had been handled roughly for years at the Morrison operation, confined in spaces too small, jabbed with electric prods, treated as nothing more than a bucking machine designed to throw riders. By the time he'd arrived at Rodriguez Ranch, his trust in humans had been shattered. Every person who approached meant potential pain, so he'd learned to strike first. But this small girl with the sad eyes and gentle voice, she was different. She didn't approach with ropes or prods. She didn't shout or make aggressive movements. She just sat under her tree and talked to him like he mattered, like he was worth listening to. On Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before Mateus Gonior was scheduled to make his decision about Schumann's fate, Sofia made a choice that would change everything. She'd been sitting under the oak tree for about 20 minutes, telling Schumann about a drawing she'd made in school that day, a picture of her mother in heaven surrounded by stars, when she heard voices approaching. It was Sebastian Javier and Bartolomeu Silva, carrying tools and talking in low voices about reinforcing Schumann's pen before the owner's inspection. Sofia knew she should leave before they saw her, before they told her grandfather she'd been breaking the rules. But something made her stay. She watched as the two cowboys approached Schumann's pen from the opposite side. Schumann immediately went into defensive mode. His head shot up, his body tensed, his ears flattened back against his skull. He pawed the ground once, a clear warning. "Easy, big guy," Bartolomeu said, his voice calm but wary. "We're just fixing the gate. Don't need to get excited." But Schumann did get excited. He charged the fence, stopping just short of impact, bellowing a sound so loud that Sofia felt it in her chest 40 feet away. Both men jumped back, their tools clattering to the ground. "Dios mío," Sebastian muttered. "He's getting worse. Mateus is going to take one look at him Friday and send him straight to auction." "Can't blame him," Bartolomeu replied, retrieving his hammer with shaking hands. "This bull's a lawsuit waiting to happen." They worked quickly, making their repairs while staying as far from Schumann as possible. The bull paced along the fence line, snorting, displaying all the aggressive behaviors that had earned him his dangerous reputation. But then something remarkable happened. Schumann's pacing brought him to the side of the pen closest to where Sofia sat under the oak tree. The moment his eyes found her, sitting there quiet and still, his entire posture changed. The aggression drained away. His ears came forward, his head lowered. He stopped pacing and just stood there, looking at her. Sebastian noticed first. "Bart, you seeing this?" Bartolomeu turned and froze. "What the hell?" Both men watched as Schumann, the bull who'd charged them 30 seconds earlier, stood completely calm while gazing at a 7-year-old girl under a tree. The transformation was so complete, so impossible, that neither man could find words. Sofia stood up slowly. Her grandfather had told her never to approach the pen, and she'd obeyed that rule for 3 weeks. But something in Schumann's eyes was different today. Something that looked almost like plea. "Sofia!" Sebastian called out, his voice tight with fear. "Don't move! Stay where you are!" But Sofia had already made her decision. She walked slowly toward the fence, her small feet moving through the grass, her eyes never leaving Schumann's. The bull didn't move, didn't paw the ground, didn't display any of the warning signs the cowboys knew to watch for. "Sofia, stop!" Bartolomeu's voice was panicked now. "Fernando! Fernando! Get out here!" But Sofia kept walking, 20 feet from the fence, then 15, then 10. She could see every detail now. The scars on Schumann's hide from rough handling, the intelligence in his eyes, the tension in his massive body that wasn't aggression, but something else. Anticipation. Hope. 5 feet from the fence. Sofia stopped. She raised her small hand, palm open, fingers extended, and in a voice that somehow carried across the entire ranch, she said the words that would break every hardened cowboy within earshot. "It's okay. I'm sad too. You don't have to be angry anymore." Then, as Sebastian and Bartolomeu held their breath, as Fernando came running from the barn shouting Sofia's name, as every person on the Rodriguez ranch watched in frozen horror. Sofia pressed her palm against the fence rail and waited to see if Schumann would do the impossible. Time seemed to stop. Fernando was running full speed from the barn, his heart hammering in his chest, terror flooding every nerve. Sebastian and Bartolomeu stood frozen, hands outstretched as if they could somehow pull Sofia back through sheer will. Regis had emerged from the equipment shed and stopped mid-stride, his face pale. Sofia's small hand remained pressed against the fence rail, her palm facing the massive bull who'd charged grown men just minutes before. Schumann stood 5 feet away on the other side of the fence. His head was lowered slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the child. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, he didn't move. The entire ranch held its breath. Then, slowly, so slowly it seemed almost dreamlike, Schumann took 1 step forward. Then another. His massive hooves made soft thuds in the dirt. His body moved with careful deliberation, none of the explosive aggression the men had come to expect. "Sofia! Don't move!" Fernando called out, still 20 yards away, his voice strangled with fear. "Baby, please don't move." But Sofia wasn't moving. She was standing perfectly still, her hand steady against the rail, her eyes locked on Schumann's with a trust that defied everything the adults knew about this bull. Schumann reached the fence. He was close enough now that Sofia could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, could see her small reflection in his dark eyes. Close enough that one sudden movement, one violent reaction, could end everything. The bull lowered his head further, bringing his face level with Sofia's outstretched hand. His nostrils flared, taking in her scent. His ears were fully forward, not a trace of aggression in his posture. And then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible from an animal his size, Schumann pressed his broad forehead against Sofia's palm. The contact lasted 5 seconds. 5 seconds of a 2,200-pound bull, known for his violence and rage, standing perfectly still while a 7-year-old girl touched him through the fence rails. 5 seconds that shattered every assumption, every warning, every piece of conventional wisdom about handling dangerous livestock. Then Schumann made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that wasn't aggressive or threatening. It sounded almost like relief, like something locked inside him for years had finally been released. Fernando reached Sofia and swept her up into his arms, pulling her back from the fence with trembling hands. But Sofia wasn't scared. She was smiling, the first real smile Fernando had seen on her face in 8 months. "Abuelo, did you see?" she said, her voice filled with wonder. "He's not mean. He's just lonely, like me." Fernando couldn't speak. He held his granddaughter tight against his chest, his weathered face wet with tears he didn't try to hide. Around them, Sebastian and Bartolomeu stood in shock, their tough cowboy exteriors cracked wide open by what they'd just witnessed. "I don't believe it," Sebastian whispered. "I don't believe what I just saw." Bartolomeu was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, not ashamed of the tears. That bull. He knew. He knew she was special. He knew she was safe. Regis walked up slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Fernando, I've worked with cattle for 20 years. I've never seen anything like that. Never." Fernando set Sofia down, but kept his hands on her shoulders, looking into her eyes. "You could have been hurt. Do you understand that? Schumann is dangerous." "No, he's not," Sofia said with the absolute certainty only a child can have. "He's scared. People hurt him, so he hurts people back. But I didn't hurt him, so he didn't hurt me." The simple wisdom of her words hit every man standing there like a physical blow. They'd all been so focused on Schumann's aggression, his danger, his unmanageability. None of them had stopped to see him as what he was, a traumatized animal responding the only way he knew how. Fernando looked back at the pen. Schumann hadn't moved from the fence. He was standing there still, his head lowered, his eyes on Sofia. The violence was gone. The rage had evaporated. For the first time in 2 years, the bull looked at peace. "She saved him," Regis said quietly. "That little girl just saved that bull's life, because there's no way Mateus is selling him now. Not after seeing this. Fernando nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He picked Sofia up again, holding her close, and as he carried her back toward the house, he heard the sound of grown men crying behind him. Tough, weathered cowboys who'd been broken open by witnessing 7-year-old innocents reach across a fence and touch something everyone else had given up on. Schumann remained at the fence, watching the girl who'd given him something he'd forgotten existed. Gentleness, trust, hope that not all humans brought pain. And in that moment, everyone at Rodriguez Ranch understood they'd witnessed something that couldn't be explained, only felt. Proof that sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest healing. Friday came too quickly. Mateus Gonior arrived at the Rodriguez Ranch at 10 a.m. in his silver pickup truck, his expression serious and businesslike. He was 53 years old, a practical man who loved his animals but understood the realities of running a cattle operation. A dangerous bull was a liability he couldn't afford. Fernando met him at the main house, but before they could discuss Schumann's fate, Sofia appeared on the porch steps. "Mr. Gonior," she said, her voice small but determined. "Can I show you something before you decide about Schumann?" Mateus looked at Fernando, who nodded slowly. "Sofia, why don't you show Mr. Gonior what happened on Wednesday?" They walked to Schumann's pen. Mateus, Fernando, Sofia, and the entire crew who'd gathered without being asked. Sebastian, Bartolomeu, Regis, and 3 other ranch hands stood in a semicircle, their faces solemn. They all knew what was at stake. Schumann stood at the far end of his pen, his massive body tense as he registered Mateus's presence. The bull had learned to associate the ranch owner with stress, with inspections, with changes that usually meant more confinement or rougher handling. "This is the bull that charged Oliver and put him in the hospital?" Mateus asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes, sir," Fernando confirmed. "But something happened Wednesday, something none of us can fully explain." "Schumann isn't mean," Sofia said, stepping forward. "He's scared, but he's not scared of me." Before anyone could stop her, though Fernando's hand twitched toward her shoulder, Sofia walked to the fence. The change in Schumann was immediate and undeniable. His ears came forward. His aggressive posture melted away. He walked across his pen with careful, measured steps until he stood at the fence directly in front of the little girl. Mateus's mouth fell open. "What in God's name?" Sofia placed her palm against the rail, just as she had 3 days before. Schumann lowered his massive head and pressed his forehead against her hand, making that same low, gentle rumbling sound that was nothing like the aggressive bellows the men had heard from him for 2 years. "He's my friend," Sofia said simply, "and friends don't give up on each other." Regis stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Mr. Gonior, we've all seen it. That bull is a different animal with her. It's like she reaches something in him that we can't touch, something that remembers how to be gentle." Sebastian nodded. "Wednesday, he charged me and Bartolomeu. We dropped our tools and ran. Then Sofia walked up, and it was like watching a light switch. All the rage just disappeared. I've worked ranches for 30 years, Bartolomeu added, wiping his eyes unashamedly. I've never seen anything like this. That little girl has a gift. And that bull, he knows she's special." Mateus walked closer to the fence, studying Schumann with new eyes. The bull was completely calm, completely focused on Sofia. There was no threat in his posture, no tension, no indication of the violent animal that had terrorized his handlers for months. "This doesn't make sense," Mateus said, but his voice had softened. "Bulls don't just change like this." "He didn't change," Fernando said quietly. "She found the part of him that we couldn't reach, the part that still remembers what it's like to be treated with kindness instead of force." Sofia looked up at Mateus with eyes that held more wisdom than her 7 years should allow. "My mama died, and I was really, really angry. At everyone, at everything. But Schumann understood, because something bad happened to him too. We're the same." She turned back to the bull, her small hand still pressed against the fence. "Please don't send him away. He needs someone who understands him, and I need him too." The words broke something in Mateus Gonior. This practical businessman, this no-nonsense rancher, felt tears stinging his eyes. He looked around at his crew, every single one of them crying openly now, These tough men with calloused hands and weathered faces, completely undone by witnessing a child's pure connection with an animal everyone had written off. "Fernando," Mateus said, his voice thick. "What if we moved Schumann to the east pasture, gave him space, made Sofia his primary handler, under supervision, of course? But what if we stopped trying to force him to be something he's not and let him just be?" Fernando's face showed surprise, then hope. "You mean keep him?" "I mean more than that." Mateus looked at Schumann, then at Sofia. "I mean we build a program around this. Sofia has a gift. This bull responds to her in ways we can't replicate. What if we use that? What if we proved that animals everyone calls impossible just need the right person to see them differently?" Sofia's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire ranch. "Really? Schumann can stay?" "He can stay," Mateus confirmed, his own voice breaking. "Because what you two have, that's not something you can explain in a manual or teach in a seminar. That's something rare, something precious. And I'll be damned if I'm the man who destroys it because I couldn't see past a reputation." Sebastian let out a whoop of joy. Bartolomeu was openly weeping. Regis grabbed Fernando in a bear hug that nearly lifted the older man off his feet. All around the pen, grown men were crying, laughing, celebrating a little girl who'd done what none of them could. She'd saved a bull's life simply by being kind. Sofia turned back to Schumann, her small hand still against the fence. "You hear that? You get to stay. You're safe now." Schumann made that rumbling sound again, and if a bull could smile, every man there would have sworn he did. As the sun climbed higher over the Rodriguez ranch, casting long shadows across the Texas prairie, a 7-year-old girl and a 2,200-pound bull stood together, separated by fence rails but connected by something far stronger. Proof that gentleness can reach what violence never could, and that sometimes the biggest healing comes from the smallest hands. 3 years later, Sofia Rodriguez stood at the fence of the east pasture, now 10 years old and taller, but still small compared to Schumann. The massive bull walked over immediately, lowering his head for her daily greeting, a ritual that never failed to move everyone who witnessed it. The Rodriguez ranch had changed. Word spread about the impossible bull tamed by a grieving child, and Mateus had created a program bringing traumatized rescue animals to the ranch. Sofia worked with them all, her gift for connection growing stronger with each passing year. But Schumann remained special. He was gentle only with children, especially those carrying their own pain. Kids from grief counseling programs visited the ranch monthly, and Schumann, once considered too dangerous to live, became a healer. Children who couldn't speak about their trauma would stand at his fence, and somehow the massive bull understood. He'd lower his head, make that gentle rumbling sound, and something in those kids would unlock. Fernando watched from the barn, his arm around his wife. "Isabella would be proud," he said quietly, speaking of their daughter for the first time without tears. Sofia took her grief and turned it into something beautiful. The ranch hands, Sebastian, Bartolomeu, Regis, still spoke in hushed, reverent tones about that Wednesday 3 years ago when they'd watched a little girl touch a raging bull and change everything. They'd all become advocates for patient, gentle handling methods, teaching younger cowboys that strength wasn't about dominance but understanding. Mateus visited monthly, always stopping at Schumann's pasture. "You saved my soul," he'd told Sofia once. "I'd forgotten that some things matter more than profit." As sunset painted the Texas sky orange and gold, Sofia pressed her forehead against Schumann's through the fence rails. "Thank you for being my friend when I needed one most." Schumann rumbled his response, and in that sound was everything that couldn't be spoken: gratitude, peace, and proof that brokenness, when met with gentleness, could become beautiful. The ranch had learned what Sofia knew all along. Sometimes the most impossible transformations happen when we stop trying to force change and simply offer love. And sometimes, the toughest men cry not from weakness, but from witnessing strength they'd never understood. The strength of a child's pure heart reaching across fear to touch something everyone else had abandoned. Schumann, the bull nobody wanted, had found his purpose, and Sofia, the girl who'd lost everything, had found her calling. Together, they proved that healing doesn't require size or strength, only the courage to be gentle when the world expects you to be hard. A girl touched the raging bull, and what he did next made even the toughest men cry.